Dear friends, this is my 5th High Holidays as your senior rabbi. Over that time, my colleagues and I have spoken clearly and forcefully about our values as a congregation. By now, you surely know where we stand. We stand for honesty and truth. We stand for the protection of our planet. We stand for immigrants' rights. We stand against gun violence. We stand against racism, anti-Semitism, and hate in all its forms. But today, friends, even the strongest among us can have trouble standing. Events of the past year have worn so many of us down. Now, recently I shared my favorite midrash in the Temple Israel Chronicle. It teaches that when God created the universe, God became so incredibly enamored of certain creations. God so treasured love and compassion and beauty and truth and justice that God created special vessels in which to contain and protect them. However, these forces of goodness wanted so badly to get out into the world that they soon shattered the vessels. Shards of those vessels, sparks, flew to each corner of the universe and embedded themselves deep within all of creation, including within the human heart. Thus, each of us is born with a spark of the divine inside of us. And that spark ignites a Jewish flame that fuels our love, arouses our compassion, inspires us to create beauty, and urges us toward truth and obligates us to justice. But sadly, too often this year we have felt our spark grow dim. At times this year, our spark was fueled by anger. For a time, the flame burned white hot like magnesium. We felt vital and alive, motivated by our opposition. However, such a flame cannot sustain itself for long. Its brilliance quickly becomes a mere flicker. We give in to exhaustion. Other times, our flame has been slowly stifled, covered over bit by bit with the daily accumulation of ash and debris. We might not even realize it's happening. The embers, though, become choked for oxygen until one day we can barely find that spark. And we give in to indifference, or worse, despair. We even have a name for this: burnout. Burnout is our effort at managing and controlling the pain of the world. And when the world is as painful as ours is right now, that's a hopeless task. The world seems increasingly chaotic and incomprehensibly unjust. Where we once sensed that we had influence and control, the future now seems to be irretrievably beyond our grasp. Yesterday's outrage is quickly eclipsed by today's new low. And every time we think it can't get any worse, somehow it does. The descent seems to be without end. No wonder our flame burns low. We are mourning the loss of the nation that we envisioned, the nation that we were promised, the nation in which anti-Semitism was a relic of history and racism was anathema, the nation where women were given equal pay and an equal shot, the nation where our own immigrant grandparents were given a chance to thrive, the nation where people of differing opinions found common ground to work together. Instead, we see a side of America that we wanted to believe no longer existed. And that side of America is surely fueled and legitimized by those in power. "This is not the America I thought my kids would grow up in," one congregant wrote to me. We're overwhelmed by the daily onslaught of lies and disloyalty. We are outraged by the separation of immigrant families. We are incredulous when we read about collusion with foreign powers to undermine our democratic process. We are pained that people of the opposite party can no longer support a Supreme Court nominee. We are dismayed by online campaigns to misinform and divide. We are baffled by the assertion that truth is not truth. We decry the delegitimization of essential functions of government, of journalism, and of science itself. We fear that kindness and decency no longer matter. We fear that people now seem to have permission to act on their basest emotions. I could go on, but why? I can't tell you anything that you don't already know, except that we all feel it, even me. There are days when I myself have felt beaten down and disheartened and discouraged and just plain sad. That's why I'm grateful to my clergy colleagues, and especially to my wife, who at times have pushed me to lift myself out of the morass in order to speak and write publicly. Now, each of the past several years, your Temple Israel clergy team has selected a theme for these high holidays. This isn't some gimmick. It's a recognition that while our prayer book and our high holiday rituals remain much the same from year to year, our world is so very different. And we are different too. Thus, what we need from these high holidays this year is different. This year, we desperately need to rekindle our fire. We need to stoke and nourish that divine spark that is within us, because we need that fire to sustain us for the year ahead. Fortunately, fire is ever present in the foundational stories of our people. For example, how did God know to choose Abraham as the one person with whom he would form a covenant? Well, a story is told of Abraham as a young man. He was traveling along the road one day when he saw a palace in flames. He wondered, is it possible that this palace has no owner? Surely someone must own this palace and thus take responsibility for putting out the flames. Just then, the owner of the palace peeked his head out of a window and said, "I am the owner of this palace." And so too, God said to Abraham at that moment, "I am the ruler of the universe." Rabbi Jonathan Sacks comments on this story. God made the palace, but man set it ablaze, and therefore only man can put out the flames. This is the revolution of Judaism, Rabbi Sacks writes. Humanity's courageous venture to extinguish the flames of immorality and bloodshed and to restore the world to the harmonious and sacred place it was intended to be. Yes, friends, a Jew sees the world on fire and takes responsibility for dousing the flames. Moses, too, was called to change the world through fire. He was a simple shepherd. He was tending his flock, minding his own business. At the time, we recall, he didn't even yet know that he was Jewish. He was out in the middle of the desert when God presented him with a bush that was on fire, yet the bush itself was not consumed. At first, Moses didn't even notice the bush. He was too preoccupied by the day-to-day. That flame in the bush was a test. Moses had to stop what he was doing. He had to turn aside and to shift his focus in a new direction in order to take notice of the flame. Only then, when Moses took notice of that flame, did God call to him from the midst of the fire in the bush. God said, "These are your people. Go free them." Yes, the road to redemption started with Moses stepping off the path to get closer to the flame. Friends, only by turning aside to find the fire can we begin to move toward redemption. And that search for redemption is always with us in Jewish life. We are constantly kindling fires, us Jews, and each time there is a specific purpose. We welcome Shabbat with candles, and this is our weekly antidote. Even after all the struggles and setbacks of the week, we kindle a flame as our assertion of eternal hope. And then as Shabbat ends, we light what's practically a torch, the multi-wicked Havdalah candle, to illuminate our way, lest in the new week we might lose the path. And we light the Hanukkah menorah at the darkest time of the year, adding to the flames each night, increasing in holiness as our sages commanded, adding light to light to light to light. And we kindle a flame during Shiva and on Yortzites, because even in the valley of the shadow of death, we kindle a flame to keep the light of memory burning bright. Why do we do this? Keep lighting flame after flame after flame. Perhaps the most important reason is that it reminds us of the Jewish mission in the world. As the prophet Isaiah writes several times, we are to be a light to the nations. And we can only light the way if our own fire is burning bright within. So our job is to nurture that divine spark, to stoke the embers when they grow dim, so that our own flame will be strong. Only then can we bring its heat and its light to the dark corners of this world. My favorite Jewish text comes from the earliest collection of rabbinic wisdom called Pirkei Avot. 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Tarfon said, "The day is short. There's much to do, and the workers are tired. Yet the reward is great, and the master of the house is waiting." He paused and continued, "You are not required to complete the work, but neither are you free to absent yourself from it." Friends, we don't have to do everything. We don't have to solve every problem, to take on the entire world. That is too overwhelming. But we each have to do something. So let's talk about what we can do. Our flame ebbs in part, I believe, because we feel like there is an unbridgeable gulf between ourselves and others who see the world so very differently. Fortunately, compassion can be a bridge over that divide. I have found that my own flame has been nurtured by learning about the lives of people who are very different from me. I particularly recommend the books Hillbilly Elegy and Evicted. Each presents a compelling and compassionate picture of the difficult lives other Americans lead. I've been reminded by reading them that every single human being is made in the image of God. Similarly, last fall, nearly 40 people from Temple Israel participated in an initiative called 2 Books, 2 Films. They each read 2 books and watched 2 films on the topic of race in America. And then they discussed the books and films in small groups. Through this, they endeavored to come to grips with the reality of racism and racial disparities in our nation. They often go unseen in a community such as ours. And now I'm working with interfaith leaders to launch 2 Books, 2 Films more widely across the entire Westport community in the year to come. So too, leaders of both parties have contributed to the narrative of an unbridgeable divide. They've repeatedly dismissed the other in advancing their political objectives. We remember many of the quotes. Hillary Clinton dismissed the basket of deplorables. Mitt Romney dismissed the 47% Barack Obama dismissed those who cling to guns and religion. Friends, this is not about election day. It's about every day. Let us not support those who fight against an opponent and those who dismiss and disregard our fellow citizens, but rather let us support those who fight for a vision of society. Because our greatest sin is acquiescence. Acquiescence to the erosion of our discourse, to the devaluation of truth, to the coarsening of public debate. Acquiescence to the vilification of the other, to racism and xenophobia, to mistreatment of the lost, the lonely, the looked over, and the left out. In recent days, we have all been reminded that we would do well to aspire to John McCain's model of decency and honesty and selflessness in public service. Fortunately for all of us, fire works in a particular way. Each flame is kindled from another, and yet the original flame is not diminished. So I want to tell you about some flames that burn bright in our own community. As frustrated as we might be with Washington or Hartford, there are so many people right here in this room doing good things for our community and for the world. I encourage us to stand close to them so that our own inner fire may be rekindled. Each of them is a reason to be proud and hopeful, to re-energize and re-engage. We can rekindle our flame first by taking hold of our own future. My very first B'nai Mitzvah here at Temple Israel on this bima were Ben Madison and Adam Buchwald. They shared a bar mitzvah service in September of 2014. Ben is now president of our BBYO chapter and serves on Temple Israel's board of trustees. Adam and his family subsequently moved to Parkland, Florida, where he and his brother attend Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Following the horrific shooting in February at their school, Adam became a leader in the March for Our Lives movement. In addition, he founded Parents Promise to Kids. It's an online contract that asks parents and grandparents as well to pledge to prioritize their children's safety over gun rights when they enter the voting booth. Adam said, "This is now our mission in life, not a quick media show that will fizzle out." And I am also proud of our teens locally, such as Ilana Atlas and Michaela Danter and Audrey Bernstein and others who have become local leaders in our shared effort for a safer nation. We can also rekindle our flame through service. Many members of this congregation have run successfully for public office just within the past year. Some are running right now. Many others of you have taken on positions of leadership in our local community and beyond. And in that vein, I want to recognize our own Dr. Scott Gottlieb, head of the FDA. He has, in the words of Fortune magazine, pushed for creative ways to slow the skyrocketing rise of medicine prices, aggressively tried to reduce cigarette smoking, and tried to contain America's raging opioid epidemic. We can rekindle our flame in the private sector, too. When our nation pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, many corporations voluntarily committed themselves to its goals. And while legislation on gun violence has been stalled, financial sector giants like BlackRock have stepped up to push the gun industry toward greater transparency and greater safety. There are some in this room who have played a role, large or small, in such steps. And we can rekindle our flame with our neighbors. Some of you know that last spring there was a regrettable incident of anti-Semitism at a lacrosse playoff game between Staples and Fairfield Prep. Just days later, Dr. Thomas Samiski, president of Fairfield Prep, took his community to task during commencement, his school's most significant gathering of the entire year. Reverend Samiski spoke with candor and emotion about his disappointment in his school community. He initiated a dialogue with several local rabbis, myself included. And most importantly, Reverend Samiski took immediate and decisive action to, in his words, eradicate the roots of intolerance and hate through a revamping of the entire Fairfield Prep curriculum. I applaud Reverend Samiski. In a world darkened by encroaching anti-Semitism and intolerance, his flame burns bright. Now this, friends, is certainly not an exhaustive list. In fact, if you know someone from whose work you draw strength, I want to know. Please get in touch, because I want others to be able to draw strength and inspiration from them as well. Remember that midrash I shared at the beginning, the one about the sparks that flew to each corner of the universe and embedded themselves deep within all of creation? Well, the sparks of goodness may be hidden, but they surely are not lost forever. Indeed, they are waiting to be found throughout all of God's creation, and the task of reuniting them is left to human beings. One day, I believe that our children will ask us, "What did you do at this pivotal time in history?" On this new year, let us commit ourselves to reuniting those divine sparks of creation. Over these high holy days, may each of us rekindle our own Jewish flame. May that flame warm us from within. May our souls rediscover wonder and possibility. And may we cultivate hope and purpose in the year ahead. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be so.
Dance me to your beauty with a burning violin. Dance me through the panic till I'm gathered safely in. Lift me like an olive branch and be my homeward dove. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. Oh, let me see your beauty when the witnesses are gone. Let me feel you moving like they do in Babylon. to the children who are asking to be born. Dance me through the curtains that our kisses have outworn. Raise a tent of shelter now, though every thread is torn. Just dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. Lie, 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 dance me to your beauty with a burning violin. Dance me through the panic till I'm safely gathered in. Touch me with your naked glove, or touch me